What is a rebel vegan? A rebel vegan is someone who has a take on veganism for a brave new world. One such person is author Todd Sinclair. Todd is known as the rebel vegan. He's out there to make a difference, and he's doing so one rebel at a time. Stick around, you're in for a great treat.
Welcome to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show, where your host, Kathleen Gage, shines the spotlight on vegan and plant-based businesses and entrepreneurs from all walks of life committed to cruelty-free eating, healthy lifestyles, animal compassion, and the environment. Enjoy the show.
Todd, I have to say that I love your book. I love what you stand for.
Thank you.
And gosh, I'm going to say I love you. As I've been reading your book, as I've been reading your book, you've had some interesting experiences that really led you to the life of being a vegan. So why don't we start with you giving a little bit of background on your experience? I can't remember what country it was in, maybe Vietnam.
Canada.
Yeah.
I grew up in Canada. Sorry. So to take it right back, I grew up in a dairy farm, quite a large, it was a multiple use farm, but a fairly big dairy farm. So I've kind of gone from one end of the spectrum to the other, and it was, you're right. It was in Vietnam though, where I kind of had my awakening, Kathleen, in the sense that very much I just grew up not really questioning the system that I was immersed in, I suppose. I mean, it wasn't until later that I kind of became a vegan and started looking into it that I almost had flashbacks of different things I was a part of when I grew up on this large farm. But I mean, basically, to go forward, I moved around the world and traveled and done lots of things, but it wasn't until I became quite sick. So it was really health reasons that brought me to a plant-based diet originally, and then veganism and more activism. And that was really getting really ill. And I had a lot of contacts in Southeast Asia because I developed big tours throughout 6 or 7 countries in that region that I took shelter and was in a monastery where I knew some monks, and they put me instantly, and they also did a herbal treatment, but put me on a plant-based diet and really taught me kind of the simplicity of food and how beneficial that could be. And I always say I didn't convert to Buddhism, but I did convert to vegan values. It was just a very life-changing moment. And then as soon as that happened, and I realized how quickly I felt better, I quickly started doing research and almost highlighted some of the practices that I grew up with that I assumed was just natural. So that was quite sobering and quite hard as well to kind of deal with my past.
Well, and I think for a lot of us, we look at that and we go, how could I have been so disconnected?
Oh,
because,
gosh, yeah.
In your book, you talk about the spiritual side of being a vegan and not consuming animals. And, as I was deciding which show I was going to put you on, initially I thought maybe plant-based eating for health, because you're definitely a healthy person who eats plants. And then I thought, no, I want to talk about the whole vegan philosophy, the vegan movement, and how much we have been lied to and how it's impacting our health during the pandemic. But let's take a step back. And I know it was 1944 that the term vegan was first coined. And yes. I love the introduction to your book. And you actually have the foreword done by Victoria Moran, who just
very
amazing
lucky
woman.
Oh, she is.
Let's start with even further back than that, that animals were not a part of people's diets. Contrary to what we've been led to believe, we have been led to believe that the cavemen went out and got the saber-toothed tiger and, everybody lived happily ever after as the little woman was at home. That term, I just can't deal with, the little woman at home. But,
I won't use it.
So much of what we were led to believe and we continue to be led to believe is not true. So give us kind of a 30,000 foot view of the history.
Yes, well, that's what I wanted to do very much with this book, is that it was born during lockdown here in the UK. And so it was I was in this, my sort of isolation as such, in lockdown. And I love history, and it's a big part of what I used to do pre-COVID. I always say there's almost 2 worlds here. There's the pre-COVID and post-COVID. And, doing tours and learning about history of different cultures and different movements. And so when I wanted to really look at veganism through this lens, why veganism matters now today, I wanted to look backwards first and really do a big history of it. So I really looked at that. And like you said, even like the cavemen, there's all this sense that, of us hunting and this great, as if you think history anyways, usually written by the victors. So that would put very much the caveman and place, and all the depictions on walls. I always say that was the male ego often, you know what I mean? We didn't depict the more what was seen as, or the more, the gatherers, the people who actually had the subsistence, who kept everybody going. And it's very clear now in archaeology and when they piece it together, that diet was a very minimal part of our ancestors' diet, even though we thought that's what kept them going and maybe helped them evolve. Increasingly, I think that's turning the more we find out. And so I was just kind of highlighting that, even our pre-ancient history, our ancestors, and then going through and talking about the sweep of history right up to now. And, very much the philosophers of more recent years, or the thinkers, took up from the Greeks, and to talk about all the Greek thinkers and the great thinkers who questioned that, from Plato's and all of them, and talked about animal rights and a moral context, but also talked about the benefits of health and diet, and very much emphasized plant-based nutrition. And all those things were kind of forgotten or kind of whitewashed over as increasingly, with, say, the agrarian revolution and the industrial revolution, we got more settled, and farms became bigger. And, it was almost like when I wrote this huge chapter on veganism, our kind of, I called it even, one chapter, one sub chapter, standing on the shoulder of giants. I wanted to look back at those original kind of, rebels and radical thinkers who talked about this and stood up for animals. And that was really important to me. And then it was almost like then the rest of that chapter was slowly, you could see where the thinking was changing, and increasingly, with the Industrial Revolution and commerce, that it was more about money and upscaling, and the farms got bigger. And then all of a sudden, traditionally, even, a middle class or lower class families are not expected to eat meat on their plate, except for a very special or a big occasion or feast. So all of a sudden, where it became that this was advertised and promoted very much by our governments, even as something that every family has the right to, and even look at the Second World War, when everybody came home, rations were ended and everybody had the right to have meat on their table 3 times a day. So it just got more and more ingrained in our culture. And it was almost like this story of increasing kind of menace and doom, as our history moved on. And with the government subsidies and advertising, and it just led up to this situation where we have this terrible, this beast of the food system we currently live in.
Right.
And we've all been kind of fought this, or we were all kind of sold this idea that meat was somehow natural and normal and necessary in our diets and part of our life. So it did become part of all our festivals and our holidays, where now it just became part of who we are. So I was just trying to look at that and try to pick it apart, and how it built up, and all those brave people who did call it out all the way along. Right.
Well, and I do encourage people to get your book. It's called Rebel Vegan Life. And this is one of a trilogy, correct? Am I correct in that?
So the first one really has the history. That's the radical take. So that first book, what I really wanted to do in that, and I was advised in kind of my publishing course and everything else, that people don't really always, or the big audiences don't want to necessarily want to know the why. They want to know the how.
Right.
But my first book very much is a deep dive, and it's kind of why veganism matters, because I thought in this post-COVID, post-pandemic world where we're living with this, I thought it's important to reassess and do a deep dive in veganism and why it does matter. So that very much is the why. And then the next book, and then the series, was very much the nitty gritty of the nutritional aspect. And I wrote that with a nutritionist about how you can incorporate veganism day to day and beyond your diet, take vegan values and fully into your lifestyle, into fashion and everything else. So they were kind of the yin and yang, or kind of the two sides of it. And I realized during isolation, I was doing the research for these books, that they both there's enough there for both of them to be standalone books, even though they're complementary and can work together.
Well, I definitely, what I found interesting, because I like to dig into the history of a topic. The further I go into the vegan lifestyle, when I started, I was a plant-based eater. I didn't want to be a crazy vegan. I didn't want to be a rebel vegan by any stretch of the imagination. And then about 6 months into it, I literally was walking by the meat department in the grocery store, going to another department, and I was stopped in my tracks, and I felt the pain and suffering. And it was in that moment I had my transformation, if you will, to where I'm a vegan and I can never go back. And what I found so interesting about your book, and we'll put the link in the show notes, but what I found very interesting is that the history is so well researched. And as I was reading about World War II, my mother was in Belgium during the war. She was in occupied Belgium by the Nazis. And I remember growing up on stories on Sunday meal. We always had a big roast beef, and that was like our luxury meal. And she would share stories about how they had to do food rationing, and they would go days often without food. And I mean, just horrendous stories. And so meat was associated with the fact that you had luxury, you had comfort, you had wealth, you had abundance. And even though we were not a wealthy family by any stretch, but that was symbolic. And so
it'd be aspirational. Your family would want to, incorporate meat and have these feasts.
Absolutely. And yet what I found also interesting is, fast forward, let's go into the 50s, when TV dinners became really popular and meat was a part of the, processed meat was a part of TV dinners. And then you move through every decade and you get to where we're at now. We're screwed. I mean, we really are in a bad way right now. And a lot of people don't want to know the truth. But what I found so interesting is how much our tax dollars subsidize animal agriculture. So let's talk about that a little bit. And before you do, I want to remind people that you're listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show. This is Kathleen Gage, your host, and I'm talking with Todd Sinclair, and he is known as the Rebel Vegan, and he's bringing along a lot of rebel vegans where we're able to make changes in the world without shoving it down your throat like the food manufacturers do. We're here to raise your awareness. So Todd, tell us about the subsidization that takes place.
Well, I think a lot of people, I remember even growing up in a farm, and being spoken about around my family dinner table about how different political parties would get in power, and that would impact the subsidies for farmers. So it was just kind of background noise to me as a child, because it didn't really matter, because it didn't involve me directly. But then, especially when I almost came out as a vegan, I wanted to kind of do this expose and look at each country, Western countries, especially what we do to prop up farming, and how powerful, more so how powerful the meat and the animal agricultural industry is in Washington, in Ottawa, here in London, and all through Europe. So we go to the supermarket quite instantly and we think, wow, look how cheap the meat is, or especially processed meat, like you said. But just generally, the price of a burger compared to something, and think of all the resources that a burger needs, the water, the land, all those things. And then compared to vegetables. And yet I can understand why somebody who, has a really tight budget would almost prioritize meat over something that is more healthy, because they've been subsidized so bad. So we're paying for it. When I was working out of my book, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I was working it all out, we pay for it in our tax dollars, all of us, whether we agree with the system or not. And that's kind of where we should get upset, because I think a lot of people, even if they are mindful meat eaters, I call them, they're aware to cut back on their meat and they don't want too much. And, they often are not unaware. And I think it's something that a lot of people, when they do find out, get quite angry, and understandably so, that everybody is paying for this in their tax dollars, and more than they realize. So they're paying for it there. And then also, beyond just paying for it at the supermarket, when you buy, you're paying for it there in your tax money already to prop this up, this whole industry. And then you're paying for the health aspect in your healthcare systems or whatever, when everybody, when the biggest killers are usually related and connected to that. So you're getting hit lots of different ways, but just superficially, when you go to the supermarket or you go to a fast food outlet and you're buying a burger, you think, wow, this is cheap. This is cheaper than getting healthy, fruit and vegetables, which took a lot less resources. So it's just a really interesting one that we don't think about that often,
we don't. We actually don't, because we've been conditioned to be very short-term thinkers instead of saying, okay, if I take this action today, what's going to happen if I continue that action in a year from now or 5 years from now? And, I've had plenty of aha moments with my doctor many years ago. She said, I was about 60 pounds heavier than I am right now. And she said, you need to drop some weight. You need to get your blood pressure down, because if you don't, you're going to have a stroke. You're going to have a heart attack. She goes, you're not a kid anymore. And it's like, well, how dare you? And yet she was speaking the truth. And a lot of doctors won't even tell you that, and now when I actually am going very shortly for my blood work and my annual physical, and 3 months after I became plant-based, my doctor actually high-fived me. I still have a picture of us high-fiving each other. She was so pleased with my health. Now, as we look at, because you do a phenomenal job of really digging into the history, and if people take the time to read your books and they follow the trail of how we've been lied to, we've been misled, we've been manipulated. What do you see with COVID right now going on? And we're not going to talk vax or unvax or anything like that. I want to really talk about the underlying causes when people end up in the hospital. Something they don't talk about to this day are the comorbidities that are caused by meat consumption and dairy consumption. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, I think most people, first of all, COVID obviously is about our treatment of animals. First of all, most of these zoonotic or, pathogens come from that. So that's already come out, I think, by the World Health Organization, that, if we want to avoid future pandemics like this, then we have to rethink our whole relationship with food, and especially with animal agriculture. So that's a really big, that's a wake-up call. That's about us preparing for the future and rethinking. But already, I even look at my family and the health issues they've had growing up with a meat-centric diet. And what you said really made a lot of sense to me. As they get older, my aunts and uncles, and having these complications, that in itself leaves people so vulnerable. And they're healthy people who, very, a strong work ethic and are not drinkers or smokers, but they've just had such a big meat-centered diet. And that's left them vulnerable to lots of different things. And I see that happening. And I'm trying to spread the word in as gentle a way as I can without being confrontational, because, that's part of their heritage and their background. But I know that these things can even be reversed. It's not like, it's just about prevention. It's about reversing even the fact that, their blood is already clogged down with, eating meat consistently for however many years. But especially with COVID, like, it leaves you vulnerable for so many things. But what I think we're seeing now is that, well, people should, if they look at the science, it just shows that people are more vulnerable to getting COVID and then being hospitalized. So more serious COVID. So it's across the board health. And I think that really speaks to a lot of people as well. A lot of people, you said about, you originally almost had this wake up call with this health thing. That makes perfect sense. To me, that's what it was as well. And then you have this realization later, you come for the health, but you almost stay, you realize the ethics, you realize the other side of it, and you stay for that. You realize that you compromised your own ethics all these years. And I just kept my blinkers on and just went forward, telling myself this is the way of the world. But as soon as you open that almost Pandora's box, and that could be often through health, and then you start looking at the bigger picture, and you realize your own sense to how many times you turned away and you didn't want to go there, and you've compromised, that cognitive dissonance is what it's called for, but it's just about your own ethics and living in line with your own values. And we've kind of not been doing that, most of us, all our lives. So COVID's highlighted that, hasn't it? It really shaken us up.
And actually, Dr. Michael Greger wrote a good book called Preventing Pandemics or something. It has pandemic, and he wrote it probably 15 years ago.
Absolutely. And we never listened.
He had the answer. He continues to have the answer, as do many of us. We have the answer. And it's a matter of how committed we are to raising people's awareness without, again, making them wrong. Because my 89-year-old aunt recently was visiting, and she was saying something about, she had a salad dressing. And I said, I don't consume that because it's got dairy in it. She goes, what's wrong with dairy? And I said, oh, well, the dairy manufacturers. And I started explaining to her. She goes, no, that's not right. And I said, what do you mean it's not right? She goes, why would they tell us it's healthy? Milk does the body good. And I'm like, oh my gosh, 89 years old. She's been so conditioned. And That's
So
the way of
conditioned.
the world.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
in
It's a
looking
wake-up
at
call. Yeah.
what's that?
It's a wake-up call. And I think a lot of people don't want to listen as well. I
It
think
means they have to change.
yeah, and it does. It's challenging, and it's sometimes easy to put your head in the sand. You know what I mean? And not hear what's happening all around you. And slowly but surely, hopefully, more and more people are. And that, I think, that's a good thing. It's almost contagious or infectious in itself. This good, as we share our stories. And I think we can just lead by example. And people go, "Wow, you look really good. You seem really centered and really." And there is I think, a confidence and a contentment that comes with living in line with your values.
Well,
For one,
and you really talk about it in the chapter on the
Mm.
spiritual connection to animals, because when we're
Yeah.
consuming dead beings and
Mm.
putting them in our
Yeah.
bodies, and that energy is going into us, I mean, what are we doing? We're living a
Yeah.
dead life. And when we put
Yeah.
life and plants and green and all that into and it seems very woo-woo to a lot of people, but it's
It
just
can.
simple science. I mean, people say
It
follow
is.
the science. This is simple science. So as we move further into the pandemic, I have to share with you quickly a story about a year ago when there was a lot of hype around the pandemic, and there continues to be. I have very strong feelings about that, but they had
Yeah.
this story about a very healthy teen boy. He was 15 years old. He was diagnosed with COVID, and the next day he died. And they said, very healthy teen boy. They showed a picture of him. He had to be at least 100 pounds overweight. And I thought, this is lies. They continue to lie to
fear.
people. People
Yeah.
read the headlines and they say,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, I'll put the Band-Aid over it instead of getting to the foundation."
Mm.
What can you recommend for people to get to the foundation of their health, of the environment, of the animals, in making the decision to at least give veganism a try?
Well, even like now we're the month of January, people hopefully, people around me, I see it happening more and more now when I have that talk at a dinner party. People are aware, and they, especially younger people, they know maybe they've made choices or they are sticking their head in the sand, but slowly they know that times are changing and they have to rethink. And that's challenging, but if it can be done in I think, a really good way, that it's almost like outreach. So you're not going to be that kind of, there's one way to live your life. And that doesn't get you anywhere. It just builds more antagonism, I think. And I think often when I go into a social setting and people know I'm a vegan or whatever, it can raise up people's, the hair on their back anywhere. And they're a little like, okay, what are you going to say to me? So I go in really gentle. And I think health is a really good way, because ultimately, people often don't want to hear. They've got to come to that almost realization about the ethical, more moral side about, and it is a huge thing, the animal welfare side. But the health side is something we all share. It's really highlighted now, especially during the time of COVID, where we all want to be healthier. We're worried about our immunity. That's something that you can actually, it's almost like go in and talk and share your story. And as soon as you open up and say, I've been scared about my health and COVID's worrying me, and this is why, and my family, maybe my elderly grandmother, and you just slowly get it into health. And health is such a common factor. I find that when I do that, and I know the backs are going to go up to the meat eaters anywhere, they're worried I'm going to preach. Health, you can share that, you can share your honest story, and slowly you can get in some of the more hard-hitting information of how a plant-based or vegan life can really have huge benefits. And then people's interests are peaked. Like if you think of those classic documentaries now that are really getting in there, like Game Changer on Netflix, by Arnold Schwarzenegger. I think that had a massive impact. When I talk to people now, they go, wow, I watched that and I rethought my whole diet. It's visual and it's about health. That, it does touch on the animal welfare, and it does touch on the environment, but really that is, that's a vegan film, a documentary focusing on health. And that hit a lot of people because it was athletes, high performance athletes, about recovery, about immunity. So I think that really, things like that. And then, you will have people where you can access to environment or animal welfare. But I think health to me is where I bond, and I can get in there and I can really start to make people think and spread the word without being overbearing or just closing people down. And it's a thin line because, I feel passionately about this and I have a lot to say. But then I realize if I go too far, I've lost them.
Well,
gone.
it reminds me of when I got sober 38 years ago. It's like when I first got sober, I wanted everybody to have the experience to be
Yes,
on the
of
pink cloud.
course.
And then I
Yeah.
realized, not everybody's an alcoholic, so it's not a big deal. But drinking made me fall down a lot, and break out in very
Yeah.
sociably unacceptable behavior. But quite seriously, it's like at first I was like on this bandwagon, and then it was like just rest in it and just live my life. And it's the same with being a vegan or a plant. Again, I started plant-based and I am now a vegan. I identify that way. And
Yes,
what
I
I
do too.
realize is it's about attraction rather than promotion. It's about showing through a way of life that there is a better way of life. And when people say, oh, I couldn't possibly do it, I can simply say, you choose not to. It's not that you can't do it,
Yes.
you choose not to.
Absolutely.
And, for me, it's like I'm very, very healthy and I run on a regular basis. I feel great. And I attribute that to my lifestyle choices. So, Todd, I want to again remind people that you're listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show, and I encourage you, go visit Todd's site. Todd, what is your website where people can get access?
It's rebelveganlife.com. So www.rebelveganlife.com.
Okay, we'll be
So
sure to
has
put
all
that
my
in the
books.
show notes.
And thank you very much.
You bet. And I encourage people to pick up Todd's books. You will have a real lesson in history and you'll have an awakening. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah.
I really enjoy your writing style,
Well, thank
and
you so
I'll make
much.
sure to put the link so that people can just hop over to Amazon and get the book. And in closing, Todd, what are your final thoughts for people as they move into 2022, 2023 and beyond to do with their health, the environment, and the animals?
Well, I think that generally we're still living under this cloud of COVID, aren't we? No one would have thought that we have continual kind of variants. So we still have this onus over us, and it should be a real driver for us, I think. And it is with a lot of people I see, to open your eyes. And like you say, this driver in the sense that we have to prioritize our health, but also the health of our communities in the world. And I think that's a really big one right there. We realize with COVID how connected we all are. No matter where something starts, it's going to go everywhere. We live in this global community, this global world. So I think veganism values, and I think the values of veganism, whether it's about, animal welfare or our health or world health, they're all things that were highlighted during COVID, and they've shown how we all have to work together and we have to rethink some of these systems that are ingrained and we've taken that this is just the way it is, or this is the way of the world. And we have to change them. Otherwise we will have more pandemics. But also what I can just say, from my own story is how it's radicalized my life in the sense that I've just prioritized all the things that are important to me. I've started hiding from these things that I didn't want to face. And I faced so many other things along the way. So like I say, it started with health. Then I realized, wow, I've been ignoring all these things from my past. So just opened up all these things. And it's just opened so many doors. I've connected with people as my authentic self. And that's been what's really powerful. I feel like for the first time in my life, I'm kind of living the way I'm supposed to live. And that just makes me, when I go into the world, a much happier, more confident, better person to engage with. So it's really, and that's what I think the big thing. It just changes, the life changing in so many different levels beyond just the diet.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Everything.
Todd, this has been great. I want to thank you
Wonderful
for
to meet you.
Yeah, this has been wonderful
I've
because
enjoyed all
I
your-
know that you're going to make a difference in a lot of people's lives. And I really
you.
encourage people, go out, get the books. And again, we'll put them in the show notes. And this is Kathleen Gage with Vegan Visibility Podcast Show, encouraging you, go out, live a very conscious life, think through the decisions that you make. And the next time that you have something on your plate, think about where that actually came from. What was the journey that food had to go through to get to your plate, to go into your body, to nourish you so you could do your work in the world. This is Kathleen Gage, wishing you a great day.
You've been listening to the Vegan Visibility Podcast Show. Be sure to subscribe to get notified when the next episode is live. And we always appreciate reviews. Join us next time for more inspiration, education, and motivation to build your business one cruelty-free and healthy person at a time.